It's late. You finally sat down to relax for the evening. You're playing your favorite game. Little do you know that there's a predator on the loose. A predator hiding in plain sight. Once you see it, it may already be too late.
Man, games have come a long way since the subscription service MMOs old school online gamers grew up on. Now, monetization has become a monster of our own making, and in this episode of MMOWTF, we're going to be taking a look at some of the most predatory monetization models on the market today. And we'll touch on how these games are built to psychologically entice you to spend, even when you might not want to.
Video games are great. But throughout the years, we've seen a lot of controversy over our favorite pastime that ranges from complaints about violence in video games to blatant sexual themes. In some cases, gaming has even been widely politicized and demonized by governments all around the world. We've also seen a paradigm shift in monetization models at an accelerated pace over the past 2 decades. Many games over the past 10 years have transitioned to free-to-play, or a freemium model when a traditional box price and mandatory subscription have failed to keep the lights on. With the rise of these monetization models came an increase in cash shops, and these cash shops now permeate just about every live service game in existence. These days, we as players argue continuously about what is fair in a cash shop. Cosmetic-only shops seem to be the most preferred method, but time-saving items like experience potions and dungeon reset tokens are often more controversial, but shops that allow you to purchase like the best weapons, the best gear, or the best characters outright are all considered pay to win and are for good reason the most controversial. For years, even in the worst case scenario where you had a pay to win shop, in the very least you knew what you would get with the money that you spent. Enter loot boxes, which are a perversion of the RNG loot system that MMORPG gamers came to know and love. Loot boxes remove the necessity for skill or for playing the game at all in favor of the infamous slot machine mechanic where you just swipe your credit card for only a chance to get what you want. With loot boxes came a whole host of problems gamers never had to deal with before. In the 2018 article published in the weekly international journal Nature.com, Dr. Aaron Drummond and Dr. James Sauer studied not only the motivations and psychology behind loot box mechanics in games, but they detailed many of the features games have employed that are in direct parity with gambling. These features range from whether you have to pay for these loot boxes and if there's a chance involved, to whether you earn a competitive advantage by spending on these loot boxes, and whether there's an option to cash out what you get. Either way, what you end up earning has value. But in the end, what did they find? Loot boxes were in fact akin to gambling. In the 2020 follow-up, they determined that due to the real-world monetary value of these virtual items, these video games could in fact be regulated as gambling in the future. But there's an argument out there for us MMORPG players that in some ways many of these aspects have been available for a long time now. For example, trading items within games is a common practice, and selling these items on third-party sites, while often against the terms of service for a lot of games, still happens a lot of the time. RPGs especially benefit from rare drop rates from killing monsters, based on random number generators or RNG inherent in the game mechanics. Receiving these valuable drops from killing monsters can also stimulate the brain's reward system in the same way gambling can. So wouldn't you think that RPGs or some video games themselves are inherently addicting? I spoke with Dr. Anthony Bean with Geek Therapeutics and asked him that exact question.
So some games can have some addictive qualities, as everything can. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there that show that you can be addicted to running, that you can be addicted to reading, to writing, to exercising, to eating pizza. I mean, it really kind of comes in. It's the same idea of when we use the dopamine hypothesis for saying that this is addictive because look at your dopamine levels, or look at your serotonin levels, or some other neurotransmitter that's going on. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, your stuff might be like 150% to 200% higher than it normally is. But here's the fun fact. You hold a baby, your thing jumps up to 500 to 600% of your neurotransmitters coming through. You eat cheese pizza, it's at 500%. You take a drug, a stimulant, methamphetamine, and it's all it's all the way up to like 3,000% higher than where it needs to be. So if we look at those numbers in context, it doesn't really tell us that much, and I think that it's a false narrative to talk about it from a neurotransmitter standpoint. The games that we tend to see as clinical psychologists that tend to be a little bit more what we'd call fall into the realm of addictive are the ones that have loot boxes, things that really kind of encourage you to spend your money through a reinforcement paradigm of like, oh, if you don't get it now, you are going to lose this, that type of thing. I'm actually playing a game on my phone called Bullet Echo, and not a sponsor, hashtag not a sponsor. But the idea of it is if you lose twice, and this is I've done this purposely now, and this happened 3 times in a row. If you lose twice with your character, they actually immediately prompt you like, do you want to boost your character's stats with this stuff for $1.99? And I'm like, no, like stop giving me these things. Those are the types of mechanisms within games, and that comes straight from the developer. That's not necessarily the game itself. That's just a developmental perspective from the game developer itself, trying to get you to spend money. Anyone who has the ability to really look at it and be like, why would I do this? Because once they're leveled up, it really comes down to skill again, and money can't buy you skill. That's the perseverance and resilience.
Here's where we get to call out some game companies. Over the past several years, big publishers like Netmarble haven't even attempted to hide the fact that their loot box gacha mechanics are essentially gambling. In fact, Netmarble themselves have become so profitable with their RPG loot box mechanics that they've recently purchased SpinX, which is, you guessed it, a social casino studio. But gambling is only one aspect of how Netmarble takes advantage of their players. Netmarble and companies like them employ psychological tools to coax players into spending money. Through time-sensitive deals and harsh power game mechanics, players can sometimes get the feeling that these deals are too good to pass up. While the reality of the situation is, these time-sensitive deals are just a gateway into spending more over time.
These types of ideas that game developers are putting on in there are very, very well created by, and I would probably say psychologists, and I can name a few that I know are involved with the game industry that are teaching them how to do these types of things. The time-sensitive deals it's FOMO. It's a fear of missing out. It's like, oh my god, if I don't do this now, what it's going to be? It's preying on anxiety, which games themselves are taught to create us that. I mean, who hasn't had some anxiety of making that big jump with Super Mario Brothers 1 of that type of thing, or in Mario 3 where you have to drop Yoshi to get past the that big old jump there. I mean, those types of things exist and create an anxiety paradigm with us as players, and that's already ingrained within us. But if they can prey upon that to do that purchase threshold or the guarantee to win something, that's where they're really focusing and doubling down on that aspect of, if you don't do this, you likely will not continue to succeed. And us as humans, we always are geared towards succeeding. I do want to also point out that a lot of these games that we're talking about are actually mobile games, because the games that you can buy as on like for Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo, or even on Steam, they don't have these types of things. It's the ones that really kind of say in-purchase ads are part of the game. That's where these ones kind of come into play a lot.
There are more psychological factors other than just the excitement you get from the risk and reward of obtaining items. Whether we want to believe it or not, peer pressure and the underlying competitive drive that many gamers instinctively have can drive players to make poor and impulsive decisions. And maybe, even especially, when what they gain isn't what they want. Even worse, these companies play heavily on a growing psychological aspect known as FOMO, or fear of missing out, by presenting players with limited time deals that are only available if you act on them immediately. These special deals are created so that players don't have the opportunity to think about whether what they're buying is a good deal or not. Sure, by comparison to other deals on the in-game shop, the deals may seem pretty good, but these deals are also a gateway, so to speak, to bring you into the fold on spending money, because it turns out, if you're willing to say no to these deals, it actually gets easier and easier to say no to spending later on, or at least what you end up buying is a well-informed choice rather than an impulse buy.
generally, the research kind of likes to show that if you go and deny a request for one of these aspects of the game, and you say no, 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 a couple times, each time you say no, it's less likely you're going to say yes in the future. There's no guarantee to do that, because when we are able to say no the first time, it's a lot easier to say no the second, and the third, and the 15th, and the 30th, and it just becomes more annoying, and that's actually the gamers who tend to just delete the app.
It also doesn't help that many of these games are rated for children and teens. Gambling is illegal in the US in most places until age 21, with some states that allow gambling when you're 18. While in Europe and South Korea, you have to be 18 to gamble. In Japan, you need to be between 18 and 20, depending on the type of gambling. When it comes to loot boxes, though, they generally get a pass. So in the end, game companies like Netmarble and even companies like Square Enix and Capcom develop these games with the intent to appeal to young gamers with monetization practices that are inherently predatory. In a 2019 peer-reviewed article published by Dr. David Zendel, which is linked in the description, it states that over half of the top-grossing mobile games on the market contain loot boxes now, and 94% of games that contain loot boxes are marketed to players of age 12 and older. There are a lot of games out there that utilize loot boxes that are great games. Genshin Impact, Marvel Future Revolution, both really great games, and people who love these games might tell you that you don't have to spend a thing to progress. Unfortunately, that isn't telling you the whole truth. Games like Genshin Impact and Marvel Future Revolution have very clearly defined power gaps between those that are willing to spend and those that don't, simply because the amount of currency you earn to roll for the gacha items that you want is limited. You can only earn a certain amount of this currency a day. To add insult to injury, in games like Marvel Future Revolution, they add a probability that you will fail when upgrading items. These items take time to grind for, and at a snail's pace, unless you spend some money to obtain them, like anti-convergium. Anti-convergium is a substance you use to level up your specialization trees, and you obtain these items through raids, but you can only do one a day without spending cash currency to do more. Once you finally do have enough, Netmarble then puts a failure chance on the upgrade of your specialization traits. So you could potentially work for days to get enough anti-convergium for an upgrade, and then fail the upgrade, which makes all that time you spent grinding nearly pointless. And that's just one facet of the game that introduces failure points, punishing regular players to the point they may be convinced to spend just so they can progress. Obviously, I've played quite a few of these games, so if you're like me and some of these games are enjoyable for you, and you knowingly go into these games expecting to spend and expecting that you'll probably waste time and money on items that you don't want, then more power to you. Over the past few years, loot box regulation has resurfaced as a topic of conversation in both the US and the EU. So there may come a time when publishers have no choice but to do away with them. So Netmarble, as great as some of your games are, it's time the gacha disappears for good. I'd like to thank Dr. Anthony Bean for joining me today, and here's what he had to say about his work with Geek Therapeutics.
Geek Therapeutics is a training facility, training company, where we train all professionals from all different paradigms of thinking. So we have people that are psychologists, mental health counselors, master's level. We have people that are occupational therapists, ABA. We have psych nurses taking our courses. It's pretty much everyone under the sun is taking our stuff, which is great because this is the power of what we can do with Geek Therapy. And what we do is we train on these different cultural artifacts of Geek Therapy. So if I have a client that wants to work with Legend of Zelda, that's a cultural artifact underneath the paradigm of video games. If I have someone who wants to work with Marvel superheroes, that's a different cultural artifact paradigm underneath comics or superheroes. Well, what we do is we take different aspects of a game or something else, and we pull it out of that, and then we utilize it within our real life. So video games are bound by rules, boundaries, things you can do, things you can't do, talent points, stuff like that. Those are the things that Geek Therapy really brings into play and hones and focuses on being a better person.
For everyone else out there, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next MMOWTF.